The wind carries the scent of snow long before winter arrives. Welcome, friends. Draw a little closer and let the old stones speak. For some castles remember more than the people who dwell within them, and some secrets sleep beneath roots older than any crown. Tonight we follow a path hidden from kings, where silence weighs more heavily than steel, and every whispered truth leaves a mark upon the soul. Come now and step quietly into the shadows. The boy fell in winter's shadow, though snow had not yet claimed the walls. Winterfell stood gray and vast beneath a hard, pale sky, its towers breathing smoke from 100 hearths, its yards ringing with iron hooves and the rough laughter of men. Bran Stark had climbed those walls all his life, nimble as a squirrel, fearless as a young wolf. He knew every broken stone, every warm chimney, every ledge where moss clung in the damp. That morning he had climbed higher than he should have, and what he saw in the ruined tower was a secret meant to kill him. He remembered the queen's golden hair first, bright as coin in the dim chamber. Then came the man beside her, white-cloaked and smiling, without warmth, his hand swift and sure. Bran had not understood what he had seen, only that it was forbidden, dangerous, and foul. The man's fingers closed around him, and the world beyond the window opened like a mouth. "The things I do for love," the man said, and Bran was falling. After that there was darkness, but it was not empty. He heard wings beating where no birds flew, and far away a wolf howled beneath the earth. Sometimes he dreamed of a crow with 3 eyes perched upon his chest, pecking at his brow, whispering that he must fly or die. He saw Winterfell from above, smaller than a child's toy, and beyond it the King's Road, running south like a scar through the land. He saw his father riding away with the king, and his sisters beside the royal party, and something black moving in the cold places far to the north. When Bran woke, the world had become smaller and crueler. His bed was too wide, his blankets too heavy, and his legs lay beneath them like things belonging to someone else. Robb stood by the window with red eyes he tried to hide, and Maester Luwin smelled of parchment, wool, and bitter herbs. "You are home, Bran," the Maester told him gently, but Bran heard the sorrow under the words. Home had changed while he slept, and the boy who had climbed towers had been buried somewhere beneath the snowless stones. At first they spoke carefully around him. They told him he had fallen, that no one had seen how, that the gods had spared him. Catelyn Stark would sit beside him for hours, her fingers tight around his hand, as if she could hold him to life by force alone. Robb tried to bring laughter into the room, speaking of sword drills and kennel pups, but his voice faltered whenever Bran asked when he might stand. Only Jon was gone before Bran woke, riding north to the wall, leaving behind a dire wolf pup with golden eyes and gray fur, who never strayed far from the bed. Summer knew what men would not say. The dire wolf would lift his head before footsteps sounded in the hall, and he would bare his teeth at those who smiled too quickly. Bran began to notice such things because he had little else to do. A servant's lie had a taste to it, sharp as sour milk. A knight's courtesy could feel like a knife hidden under velvet. When Theon Greyjoy came to jest and call him Little Lord, Bran saw envy flicker beneath the easy grin, quick and green and gone. He did not tell anyone at first. A crippled boy who spoke of dreams and hidden thoughts would earn only pity, prayers, and more cups of sleep wine. Yet the knowing grew stronger as his body remained still. When old Nan came to tell him tales, he could feel witch stories frightened even her. When Maester Luwin read letters from the south, Bran sensed the words he did not speak aloud. The realm was cracking, and Winterfell heard the sound only as distant thunder. One night, while rain tapped softly against the shutters, Bran dreamed he was inside Summer. He ran through the Godswood on 4 strong legs, the wet earth rich beneath his paws, the scent of leaf rot and cold stone filling his nose. He smelled fear near the heart tree where the carved face wept red sap in the darkness. A man crouched there with a lantern hooded in cloth, scraping at the roots with a small iron tool. Summer growled, and the man fled, dropping something black into the mud. Bran woke with his heart hammering. His room was dark, and Summer stood at the door, hackles raised, mud clinging to his paws. Bran called for Hodor, and the huge stable boy came lumbering in, sleepy and gentle, saying only his own name with concern. By dawn, Bran had persuaded him to carry him to the Godswood, wrapped in furs and shame. Beneath the heart tree, half hidden in the wet soil, they found a strip of blackened bronze, stamped with a mark Bran had never seen before. Maester Luwin frowned when Bran showed it to him. The old man turned the piece over in his ink-stained fingers, and his chain softly clinked against his robes. "This is old work," he said, though his voice had gone quieter than usual. "First men, perhaps, or made in imitation of their craft. Where did you find it?" Bran told him only that Summer had dug it up, and the maester accepted the lie too quickly. Bran felt the truth behind Luwin's silence like a closed door. Later that day, while the yard rang with spear practice and ravens croaked from the rookery, Bran asked to be taken to the crypts. Robb had gone hunting riders along the King's Road, and his mother had left for the south in secrecy, leaving Winterfell with too many empty rooms. Hodor carried him down the spiral steps, deeper and colder, past the stone kings with iron swords across their laps. The air smelled of dust, old stone, and dead winters. Summer padded ahead, silent as a shadow, until he stopped before the statue of a king whose name had nearly worn away. There, behind the king's stone heel, Bran saw fresh scratches on the floor, not old cracks, not the slow work of damp and frost, but new marks made by iron. He told Hodor to set him down, and with shaking hands, he pressed against the stone where the scratches gathered. Something shifted inside the wall with a low grinding sound. Hodor whimpered softly, Summer growled, and a narrow darkness opened behind the dead king. Bran stared into the hidden passage, cold crawling over his skin. He had thought his fall was the great wrong done to him, the wound around which all his life must turn. Now he felt another wrong beneath Winterfell, older and patient, waiting under the feet of the living and the dead. From the dark came a breath of air colder than the crypts themselves, carrying the smell of snow, iron, and something burnt long ago. Bran Stark could not walk, but in that moment he understood. He had found a road. The breath that escaped the narrow passage carried a chill unlike the cool air of the crypts. It crept over Bran's face and settled into his bones, smelling of damp earth, cold iron, and ancient ashes long undisturbed by living hands. Summer lowered his head, ears flat, every muscle tense beneath his gray coat, while Hodor shifted uneasily behind Bran, whispering his own name in a frightened murmur. The great stable boy had carried Bran into dark places before, yet this darkness seemed different, as though it watched them in silence. Bran swallowed, laid one hand against Summer's neck, and listened until the grinding of the hidden stone faded into stillness. "Hodor," Bran said quietly, "bring the lantern closer." The stable boy obeyed after a moment's hesitation, his broad hands trembling enough to make the flame dance against the walls. Rough-hewn stone stretched away in a narrow corridor carved with far less care than the crypts above, its ceiling low enough that Hodor had to stoop. Dust lay thick upon the floor, untouched except for a trail of recent footprints leading inward. Bran's pulse quickened as he studied them, for they belonged not to one traveler, but to several, some heavy, some light, all made within the last few days. Hodor looked towards the stair behind them as though wishing to flee, but Bran raised a hand before the stable boy could speak. Ever since waking from his fall, certainty sometimes arrived without warning, settling over him as naturally as breathing. He could not explain it, nor could he tell whether it came from dreams or from something buried deeper within himself. Looking at those footprints, he knew they had not been made by robbers seeking forgotten treasure. Whoever had come through this passage had returned more than once, and each visit had been careful, deliberate, and hidden from every soul in Winterfell. They moved slowly into the tunnel, Summer padding several steps ahead with his nose close to the ground. The lantern revealed walls marked by old chisel strokes and the roots of the great weirwood above, thick as a man's waist, forcing their way through the stone like pale fingers. Bran reached out and brushed one of the roots as Hodor carried him past. It felt strangely warm despite the cold air, and for an instant the world around him seemed to blur. He saw men with bronze axes laboring beneath torchlight, speaking in a tongue he did not know, while another man sealed a heavy wooden chest with dark wax before the vision vanished as suddenly as it had come. Bran drew a slow breath, his heart pounding harder than before. The tunnel returned to its empty silence, yet the memory lingered with such sharpness that it felt less like imagination than recollection. Summer glanced back toward him with bright golden eyes, almost as though the wolf sensed the same disturbance. Hodor noticed only Bran's pale face and asked softly, "Hodor?" Bran forced a small smile and answered that he was well enough to continue, though he no longer believed they were walking through an ordinary forgotten passage. The corridor ended at a chamber scarcely larger than a stable stall. Broken shelves leaned against one wall, their wood blackened with age, while fragments of cracked pottery lay scattered across the floor beneath a thick coat of dust. A narrow table had collapsed long ago, leaving behind only warped planks and rusted nails. Yet someone had visited recently, for the dust had been swept aside near the center of the room. There stood an iron-bound chest whose lock had been forced open only days before. Bran asked Hodor to lower him beside the chest, and together they examined its contents. Most of whatever had once filled it was gone, but several brittle rolls of parchment remained where careless hands had left them behind. The writing had faded almost beyond recognition. Those strange symbols still clung stubbornly to the cracked pages. Beneath the parchments rested a flat stone tablet carved with the image of a dire wolf standing before a weirwood, while above them all lay another bronze seal, matching the one Bran had found beneath the heart tree. Someone had searched the chest in haste, taking nearly everything of value while overlooking what seemed worthless. Summer suddenly gave a low growl that echoed through the chamber. Bran looked up at once, and a prickling sensation crawled across the back of his neck. He heard nothing beyond the soft hiss of the lantern, yet certainty settled over him again. Someone was approaching, not from deeper within the passage, but from the crypts behind them. The feeling came with such force that Bran spoke before he had time to question himself. "Blow out the lantern," he whispered. Hodor obeyed instantly, pinching the flame between damp fingers. Darkness swallowed the chamber, leaving only a thin ribbon of gray light filtering from the corridor. Bran scarcely dared breathe as footsteps entered the tunnel beyond. They were careful, measured, belonging to someone accustomed to secrecy. The stranger paused several times, perhaps listening, before continuing toward the hidden room. Summer remained perfectly still beside Bran, though the wolf's lips had curled back to reveal silent white fangs. A hooded man appeared at the entrance carrying a small oil lamp. Bran recognized him after only a heartbeat. It was Gage, one of Winterfell's cooks, a quiet, middle-aged man who had served House Stark for years. Without drawing notice, Bran had passed him countless times in the kitchens, where he laughed with the servants and cursed stubborn ovens like any honest cook. Yet the face before him was stripped of warmth, his eyes sharp with calculation as they searched the chamber. The knowledge struck Bran with startling clarity. Gage had never feared being discovered until today. The cook knelt beside the broken chest and muttered beneath his breath. "Impossible," he whispered, searching among the scattered scraps of parchment with growing frustration. "Someone has been here." His voice carried none of the cheerful roughness Bran remembered from the kitchens. Instead, it sounded hard and impatient, as though he had worn another man's face for many years. After another fruitless search, he gathered the remaining bronze seal, tucked it beneath his cloak, and hurried back toward the crypts without ever noticing the three silent figures hidden within the darkness. Only after the footsteps had faded did Hodor dare release the breath he had been holding. Bran motioned for the lantern to be relit, though his thoughts remained fixed on the man who had just departed. Every memory of Gage returned differently now. Small absences from the kitchens, quiet conversations ending whenever others approached, deliveries that arrived after sunset instead of dawn, things no one questioned because Winterfell trusted its own people. Bran realized with growing unease that trust was precisely what someone had been using against his family. He gathered the remaining parchments and the carved stone tablet into a bundle before Hodor lifted him once more. The passage no longer felt like a place abandoned by history. It had become the first thread of a hidden web stretching beneath Winterfell itself, woven patiently over many years by hands no one suspected. As they returned toward the crypts, Bran looked back one final time at the dark chamber disappearing behind them. Whatever secret had once rested inside that broken chest, men were still willing to risk everything to possess it. And for the first time since his fall, Bran sensed that the danger facing House Stark had begun long before a golden knight pushed a boy from a tower. Morning settled over Winterfell beneath a sky the color of hammered lead, and the castle stirred with the familiar rhythm of labor. Smiths hammered glowing iron in the yard. Stable boys hurried between restless horses, and smoke drifted upward from the kitchens in slow gray ribbons. To anyone watching from the battlements, the ancient fortress appeared unchanged, secure within its high walls and guarded by generations of loyalty. Yet Bran saw every familiar face differently now. Every servant who crossed the yard, every guardsman changing his watch, every raven leaving the rookery seemed capable of carrying secrets that no one had thought to question. Hodor carried Bran back to his chamber by a quiet stair, avoiding the busier halls as Bran requested. The stable boy never asked why, though his worried eyes lingered on the bundle of parchments tucked beneath Bran's blanket. Summer followed close behind, glancing over his shoulder more than once before they reached the safety of Bran's room. Once the door was barred, Bran spread the brittle pages across the table beside the window. The faded writing meant little to him, but the careful way the sheets had been folded suggested they had once been precious to whoever hid them below the crypts. Maester Luwin arrived before midday, summoned by one of the servants to change Bran's bandages. His chain clinked softly as he unpacked herbs and fresh linen, speaking in the calm, measured voice that had guided every Stark child since infancy. Bran watched him closely while pretending to study the rain beyond the window. The strange certainty returned almost at once. Luwin was troubled, but not because of Bran's injuries. His concern reached elsewhere, toward letters he had received, conversations left unfinished, and worries he believed no child should bear. Bran waited until the Maester finished before drawing one of the parchments from beneath the blanket. "I found this in the crypts," he said, keeping his voice even. Luwin's hand stopped in midair before slowly lowering to the table. He examined the page for several long moments, his gray eyes narrowing beneath bushy brows. "Where exactly?" he asked at last. Bran answered truthfully enough that it had come from a hidden chamber beneath the old kings, though he did not mention the footprints or the cook. For the first time since Bran had known him, Maester Luwin hesitated before speaking. "There are old places beneath Winterfell that even Lord Eddard rarely visits," he said quietly. "Some passages are older than the castle itself, built by the first men and altered over centuries. Many stories surround them, though stories have a way of growing larger with each generation." Bran listened carefully, sensing that Luwin was choosing each word with unusual care. The Maester was telling no outright lie, yet something remained deliberately unspoken beneath his explanation. Bran slid the carved stone tablet onto the table. The dire wolf beneath the weirwood seemed almost alive in the pale afternoon light, its carved eyes fixed upon something beyond the edge of the stone. Luwin inhaled sharply before he could hide the reaction. His fingers traced the edge of the carving without touching the wolf itself. "This," he murmured, "belongs to a much older age than the crypts above. I have seen drawings like it only once before, copied from fragments kept at the Citadel." When Bran asked what it meant, the Maester answered with frustrating honesty, "I do not know." After Luwin departed with the tablet, promising to study it more carefully, Bran remained uneasy. He trusted the old Maester, as he trusted few others, yet trust no longer felt as simple as it once had. The cook hidden beneath the crypts had smiled and laughed beside Winterfell's ovens for years. If one loyal face had concealed another life, Could certainty truly rest on affection alone? Bran disliked the thought, but the castle itself seemed determined to teach him caution. That evening, Osha entered his chamber carrying a bowl of hot broth, accompanied by one of the guards. The wildling woman moved with the wary grace of someone who never entirely forgot captivity, though she had settled into her work with surprising diligence since her capture. Most of the household regarded her with suspicion, but Bran found himself studying her in silence. The strange awareness that had become part of him reached toward her almost instinctively. He felt fear, yes, but not fear of Winterfell. Her terror pointed north, beyond the wall, towards something so cold that every other danger seemed small beside it. Osha noticed him watching and gave a crooked smile. "You've the look of someone asking questions he doesn't know how to speak," she said, setting the bowl beside him. Bran returned the smile faintly before asking whether she had ever heard tales of hidden tunnels beneath old castles. She laughed once, though there was little amusement in the sound. Every old keep has holes beneath it. Kings bury treasure, priests hide bones, murderers hide bodies. But north of the wall, the oldest tunnels belong to things wiser than men. The guard rolled his eyes at that, muttering about wildling superstitions, yet Bran saw genuine dread pass briefly across Osha's face before she mastered it. After she left, Bran could not shake her words. He wheeled himself as close as he could to the window overlooking the Godswood. Rain drifted softly through the branches of the great weirwood, turning its white trunk ghostly against the gathering dusk. Summer lay asleep nearby, but one ear twitched as though listening to distant sounds beyond mortal hearing. Bran rested a hand against the wolf's thick fur and closed his eyes, willing himself to remember the strange vision from the hidden passage. Instead of the tunnel, another image came. He stood in the Godswood beneath bright summer sunlight that belonged to another age. Men wearing bronze armor gathered around the heart tree, while an elderly lord placed the same carved stone tablet into a wooden chest. Beside him stood a woman wrapped in gray furs, whose face Bran could not clearly see. She spoke only a single sentence before sealing the chest. "If the promise is forgotten, the North will stand alone." The vision ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Bran gasping in his chair. He opened his eyes to find Summer already awake, staring toward the chamber door with low, rumbling unease. A sharp knock echoed through the room. Before Bran could gather his thoughts, Sir Rodrik Cassel entered, carrying a folded letter sealed with gray wax, bearing Robb Stark's direwolf. The old knight's weathered face looked grimmer than usual as he handed it over. "Your brother asks that every gate remain guarded through the night," Sir Rodrik said. "One of the patrols found a rider dead in the Wolf's Wood. No horse, no banner, and someone had cut his tongue from his mouth." Bran looked down at the unopened letter while cold certainty settled over him once again. The hidden chamber beneath the crypts, the frightened cook, the ancient tablet, and now a silent corpse left in the woods were not separate mysteries. They were pieces of the same game laid upon the board long before he had ever climbed the broken tower. Somewhere beyond Winterfell's walls, someone had realized that another player had begun to uncover the truth. The letter felt heavier than its parchment should have allowed. Bran broke the gray wax with careful fingers, while Sir Rodrik waited beside the hearth, rainwater still dripping from the old knight's cloak onto the rushes below. Rob's hand was firm despite the haste of the writing. He spoke of the dead rider found in the Wolfswood, of men sent to search for tracks, and of uneasy whispers spreading through the garrison. There was nothing in the letter that would have frightened Bran only a few weeks earlier, yet now every sentence seemed to conceal another that had never been written. Sir Roderick watched Bran finish reading before folding his hands behind his back. "Your brother wishes to spare you needless worry," he said, though his voice carried a little conviction. "The rider may have been no more than an outlaw caught by worse men." Bran lifted his eyes to meet the old knight's weathered face, and that strange certainty returned with quiet force. Sir Roderick believed none of his own explanation. He had spent too many years guarding Winterfell to mistake ordinary violence for the careful silence of a tongue cut from a corpse. Bran handed the letter back and asked where the body had been found. The knight frowned slightly, surprised by the question, then pointed toward the northern edge of the Wolfswood, where old hunting paths wound through dense pine and oak. "There is little reason for travelers to pass there," Sir Roderick admitted. "The place lies well away from the King's Road." Bran nodded without another word. Whoever the dead man had been, he had not wandered into that lonely forest by chance. When Sir Roderick departed, Bran remained beside the window until dusk settled over the castle. Torches bloomed one by one along the walls, their flames wavering in the damp evening air, while guards moved like dark shapes across the battlements. Summer stood at the open shutter, nose lifted toward the wind, breathing deeply as though searching for a scent carried from beyond the gates. Bran rested his hand upon the direwolf's shoulder and found himself wishing, not for the use of his legs, but for the wolf's keen senses. Men could be deceived by words and appearances. Wolves trusted only what the world truly was. That night's sleep came slowly, but when it finally claimed him, it did so with unusual clarity. He was running again within Summer's body, the forest floor soft beneath swift paws as moonlight spilled between towering pines. Every scent painted a story across the night. Deer had passed hours before, foxes hunted nearby, ravens gathered somewhere ahead, drawn by fresh death. Summer followed another smell beneath them all, one Bran instantly recognized. It was the scent of the cook, Gage, though no smoke or roasting meat clung to him now, only wet leather, horse sweat, and fear. The wolf moved silently through the undergrowth until voices drifted between the trees. 3 men stood beside a fallen oak where the earth had been churned by many boots. Gage pulled his hood tighter against the rain, while another man, taller and broad across the shoulders, leaned upon a spear whose shaft bore no banner or colors. The third remained mounted, his face hidden beneath a soaked traveling cloak. "The chamber has been disturbed," Gage whispered. "Something was taken." The mounted rider answered in a calm voice that carried the weight of command. "Then find it before the Starks understand what they possess." Summer crept closer, every instinct urging silence, until a twig snapped beneath one paw. All 3 men turned at once. The spearman shouted, drawing his blade, while the horse reared violently at the sudden movement in the darkness. Summer fled between the trees as arrows hissed after him, one passing so close that Bran felt the wind of its flight. The wolf ran without looking back, leaping fallen logs and frozen streams until the voices disappeared behind the endless whisper of the forest. Bran woke with a sharp breath before dawn, his hands gripping the blankets so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. Summer lay beside the bed exactly as he always did after such dreams, though fresh mud clung to his paws once again. Bran stared at it in silence. The wolf had not merely dreamed. Somewhere in the wolf's wood, Summer had truly found those men. Whether the words Bran heard belonged to the dream or to waking life no longer seemed important. The warning itself was real. He sent Hodor to fetch Robb as soon as the castle stirred awake. His brother arrived still wearing his riding leathers, dark circles beneath his eyes betraying another restless night spent organizing patrols. Robb listened patiently while Bran described the dream, saying nothing until the tale was finished. At last he folded his arms and glanced toward Summer, who watched both brothers with quiet intelligence. "You truly believe the wolf saw these men?" Robb asked softly. Bran did not answer immediately. Instead he said, "I believe someone is searching for whatever was hidden beneath Winterfell, and they fear we may already have found it." Robb paced slowly across the chamber, boots creaking against the wooden floor. Bran knew his brother well enough to recognize the struggle behind his calm expression. Lord Eddard had ridden south, leaving Robb to bear responsibilities that would have burdened men twice his age. Dreams and hidden passages belonged in old Nan's stories, yet a dead rider, missing records, and frightened servants belonged to the hard world Robb had inherited. Finally, he stopped beside the window and nodded once. "I cannot tell the garrison to hunt shadows," he admitted, "but I can send trusted men to search the place where the body was found." Before leaving, Robb rested a hand upon Bran's shoulder. "Keep what you discovered beneath the crypts between ourselves for now," he said quietly. "If someone within these walls serves another master, I would rather they believe we know nothing." Bran agreed, though the words unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Winterfell had always seemed too ancient and honorable for hidden enemies. Now every corridor held the possibility of listening ears, every familiar servant another unanswered question. The day passed beneath low clouds that refused either to clear or to break into rain. Bran spent the afternoon studying the remaining parchments with Maester Luwin, who managed to identify only scattered words written in an ancient northern hand. Most referred to boundaries, old oaths, and names forgotten even in the chronicles kept at the Citadel. One phrase appeared several times despite the faded ink: "the watch beneath the roots." Luwin frowned thoughtfully each time he translated it, but no explanation followed. It was as though the words belonged to a tradition erased so completely that even learned men remembered only its shadow. That evening a horn sounded from the outer gate, just as the sun vanished beyond the western hills. Riders returned from the Wolf's Wood carrying neither prisoners nor trophies. Instead, they bore one of their own across a horse, pale with blood loss from a deep wound beneath his ribs. Robb strode into the yard to meet them while Bran watched from the gallery above. The wounded man managed only a few whispered words before losing consciousness. Bran could not hear them from where he sat, yet he did not need to. The fear rolling through the gathered men told him enough. Someone else had been searching the forest, and whoever they were had no intention of leaving witnesses alive. The wounded guardsman survived the night, though only because Maester Lewin worked over him until the candles burned low and dawn touched the eastern towers. Bran waited outside the infirmary, with summer stretched across the cold stone beside him, listening to servants pass in hushed voices. No one laughed in Winterfell that morning. Men accustomed to facing raiders and outlaws had returned from the Wolf's Wood with fear in their eyes, and fear spread through a castle faster than fire through dry straw. Even the ravens in the rookery seemed unusually restless, their harsh cries echoing over the walls as the warning of something unseen. When Lewin finally emerged, exhaustion lined every crease of his face. He lowered himself onto the bench opposite Bran with a weary sigh before rubbing ink-stained fingers across his brow. "He will live," the maester said, "though he has lost much blood." Bran asked whether the man had spoken, and Lewin hesitated just long enough to sharpen Bran's attention. "Only a little," he admitted. "He claimed they found an abandoned camp deep within the forest. Before they could search it, arrows came from every direction. He never saw the attackers clearly." Bran watched the old maester carefully. The certainty settled over him again, quiet as snowfall. Lewin was repeating the truth, but not all of it. There had been another detail, one he had chosen to keep hidden. Bran lowered his voice until it scarcely rose above a whisper. "He said something else." Lewin looked at him for a long moment, measuring whether silence still served any purpose. At last he nodded. The guardsman claimed one of the attackers wore the colors of no house, yet carried himself like a trained knight. "Such men are expensive, Bran. They do not gather in lonely forests without reason." That answer lingered in Bran's thoughts throughout the day. Hedge knights wandered the 7 kingdoms in search of coin, but disciplined swords, hired to conceal ancient secrets, spoke of wealth and planning beyond common brigands. Someone powerful had begun moving pieces across the north while Lord Eddard remained far away in King's Landing. Bran wheeled himself to the window overlooking the training yard where Robb supervised spear drills with a determination that bordered on anger. Every command came sharper than the last. Every clash of steel echoed against the walls like a warning no one yet understood. By afternoon, Robb summoned Bran to the Great Hall after dismissing everyone except Ser Rodrik and Maester Lewin. Hodor carried Bran before the high seat of Winterfell while Summer padded silently behind them. The long hall felt strangely empty without Lord Eddard's presence. Smoke drifted lazily toward the rafters, carrying the scent of burning pine, roasted mutton, and damp wool. Robb stood beside the great chair, rather than sitting upon it, as though unwilling to claim a place that still belonged to their father. Ser Rodrik spread a rough map across the table. Small stones marked places where patrols had found broken camps, abandoned horses, and recently extinguished fires. Bran leaned forward, studying the pattern in silence. None of the camps lay near villages or roads. Instead, they formed an uneven ring around Winterfell itself, each hidden within forest or abandoned watch posts. Whoever commanded these men was not traveling through the north. They were watching the castle. Robb traced the ring with one finger. 3 camps have been abandoned since yesterday, he said. It is as though they learned we had discovered them. Bran felt a familiar chill settle behind his ribs. Gage. The cook had vanished that morning. His absence at first seemed no more than another servant missing from the kitchens until no one could remember seeing him since the previous evening. Bran did not speak the name immediately, but he knew the truth before anyone else at the table gave voice to it. He warned them, Bran said quietly. The words hung in the hall for several heartbeats. Sir Roderick cursed beneath his breath while Robb closed his eyes briefly, disappointment hardening into resolve. The guards searched his chambers, the old knight admitted. Nothing remained except ordinary clothing and kitchen tools. No letters, no coin, no trace that another life had ever existed. Bran almost pitied the old soldier. Men who built lives upon loyalty found betrayal harder to understand than defeat in battle. Robb ordered the gates watched more closely than ever before, yet Bran doubted Gage would return. A man patient enough to live years as an unnoticed cook would not stumble into a simple trap. Still, his disappearance answered one question while raising another. If Gage had risked everything to search the hidden chamber, then whatever had once filled the chest mattered more than his own life. Bran found his thoughts returning to the missing parchments. Someone had taken nearly all of them before Bran ever entered the passage. What knowledge had disappeared forever into the forest? That evening, Bran asked Hodor to carry him once more into the crypts. The stable boy frowned uncertainly, but agreed. After Bran promised, they would not enter the hidden tunnel again. Summer trotted ahead with unusual caution, pausing often to sniff the ancient stone floor. The statues of the old kings of winter stood unchanged beneath their iron swords, their blind eyes fixed forever upon the darkness ahead. Bran studied each face as they passed, wondering how many secrets those silent kings had carried to their graves. When they reached the place where the hidden passage lay concealed, Bran noticed something that had escaped him before. A thin layer of pale dust covered the stone, except along one narrow edge near the wall. Someone had touched the mechanism recently, but not from the crypt side. Bran pressed his hand gently against the cold surface and waited. Nothing moved. Whoever had entered after Gage had sealed the passage from within. A faint sound drifted through the stone. It was not loud enough to resemble speech, nor steady enough to be flowing water. Bran leaned closer while Hodor shifted nervously behind him. The sound came again, distant and metallic, followed by the unmistakable scrape of iron against rock. Someone remained beyond the hidden wall. Whether trapped or simply hidden, Bran could not tell. Summer's ears flattened, and a low growl vibrated deep within the wolf's chest. Bran motioned for silence. The scraping stopped abruptly. For several long moments, neither side of the hidden door made another sound. It felt less like two groups separated by stone than two hunters standing on opposite sides of the same tree, each waiting for the other to reveal himself first. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, footsteps retreated into the darkness beyond the wall. They faded slowly until even Summer relaxed, though the wolf continued staring at the sealed entrance as if memorizing its scent. As Hodor carried Bran back toward the stair, a troubling certainty settled over him once again. Whoever had been inside the passage had not expected visitors. They had returned after Gage's flight, searching for something left behind, and they had escaped before the hidden mechanism could be opened from the crypts. Bran looked back one final time at the motionless wall somewhere beneath Winterfell. Unseen passages reached farther than anyone living remembered, and the people moving through them seemed to know the castle almost as well as the Starks themselves. The following morning dawned beneath a low ceiling of gray clouds that seemed determined to press Winterfell into the earth. A cold wind swept across the battlements, carrying the scent of wet pine from the wolf's wood and smoke from the castle's countless chimneys. Bran had slept little. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the faint scraping of iron beyond the hidden wall and imagined unseen hands moving through passages older than the castle itself. By sunrise, he had reached one conclusion with complete certainty. If the strangers could still enter the tunnels, then there had to be another way inside. He asked Hodor to take him to the library tower before the household fully awakened. The old tower had escaped the bustle of the great keep for generations, its shelves crowded with weathered volumes copied by maesters whose names had long since faded into dust. The room smelled of parchment, beeswax, and old oak, a scent Bran had always loved even before his fall. Maester Luwin soon joined him, carrying another armful of books, with the patient expression of a man indulging a curious child. Yet Bran noticed that the maester had come more quickly than expected, as though he, too, had spent the night turning the same questions over in his mind. Together they searched every chronicle describing the earliest days of Winterfell. Most spoke proudly of Brandon the Builder, of towering walls, hot springs, and the great hall where the kings of winter had ruled. A few mentioned the crypts in passing, calling them sacred ground where every Stark must one day rest. Only one cracked manuscript copied from a much older source referred to something unusual. It described keepers who walked beneath the roots when the snows grew deep, though the next page had been torn away long ago. Bran ran his fingers gently across the ragged edge where the missing word should have been, feeling frustration rise like heat beneath his skin. Luwin closed the fragile volume with great care. Whoever removed that page did so many years ago, he observed quietly. The cut is old, perhaps older than my own lifetime. Bran looked toward the high window where ravens circled above the roofs. Then someone wanted those words forgotten before I was ever born. The maester gave no answer, but Bran sensed reluctant agreement behind the silence. Forgetting he was beginning to understand was not always the work of time. Sometimes it was a choice. As they left the library, a stable boy hurried across the yard toward Ser Roderick, speaking so quickly that several words were lost beneath the wind. The old knight immediately called for mounted men and disappeared through the gate with half a dozen riders at his back. Bran watched them go until the last horse vanished beyond the walls. "What has happened?" he asked Luwin. The maester spoke after only a brief pause. "Hunters found another body. This one hangs from an oak near the White Knife." The words settled over Bran like fresh snow. There had been no battle, no raid, no burned village to explain such a death. Someone had chosen another lonely place where few travelers would look. More troubling still was the certainty that came over Bran as he listened. The hanging was not punishment, it was a message. Someone wished Winterfell to know they were still close, still watching, and entirely unafraid. By midday, the castle gates opened once more as Ser Roderick returned. The old knight rode at the head of the column with a face carved from stone, while two men carried a wrapped body across a pack horse. Bran waited in the yard despite the cold, wrapped in heavy furs, with Summer lying beside his chair. When Robb and Sir Roderick withdrew into the great hall, Bran insisted on following. Neither argued. The time for shielding him from grim truths had quietly passed. The dead man proved to be no northerner. His boots had been crafted in the Vale, his belt buckle bore a faded merchant's mark from Gulltown, and beneath his cloak Maester Luwin discovered a leather satchel still tied securely across his chest. Inside lay only dried provisions, a small purse of silver stags, and a folded letter sealed with dark green wax. The seal had been broken before the man died. Whoever killed him had already read what he carried. Robb unfolded the letter carefully while everyone else watched in silence. Much of the writing consisted of ordinary trade accounts between merchants traveling north and south. Yet near the bottom, squeezed into the margin almost as an afterthought, appeared a single line written in another hand. "The roots remember." No signature followed those words, no explanation, only the strange sentence standing alone beneath otherwise harmless business. Sir Roderick frowned in confusion, but Bran felt the certainty strike him with such force that he almost spoke before thinking. The phrase was not meant for the dead merchant. It was meant for someone waiting in the north who already understood its meaning. Luwin examined the ink through a polished crystal lens before looking thoughtfully toward Bran. "The second hand is fresher than the rest of the letter," he said, "perhaps only a fortnight old." Robb folded the parchment again and placed it upon the table. "Then someone expected this message to arrive," he murmured, "and someone else ensured that it never did." His gaze drifted toward the shuttered windows, as though the unseen recipient might be standing just beyond them. That evening Bran returned alone to his chamber with Summer. The castle had become strangely quiet, not because fewer people moved through its halls, but because every conversation seemed to end when another pair of footsteps approached. Fear had begun teaching caution even to honest men. Bran lit a single candle and unfolded one of the brittle parchments rescued from the hidden chest. Though most of the writing remained faded beyond reading, he noticed something he had overlooked before. Tiny holes had been pierced into the parchment in a deliberate pattern, almost invisible unless held before the flame. He raised the sheet carefully toward the candlelight. The pierced holes aligned with faint ink marks beneath them, forming a rough shape that had not appeared on the page before. It was not writing at all. It was a map. The lines curved beneath what seemed to be the outline of Winterfell itself. Narrow passages branched beneath the castle like roots, spreading beneath ancient trees, connecting the crypts to forgotten chambers and tunnels extending far beyond the walls. Several paths ended abruptly where the parchment had been torn away, but one remained complete. It led north beneath the old God's Wood, then continued into a place marked by a single carved symbol Bran instantly recognized. It was the same dire wolf standing before the weirwood that appeared on the stone tablet. Bran's breath caught as another realization followed the first. Whoever had removed the missing parchments from the chest had not taken everything because they believed nothing remained. They had missed the map entirely, never seeing what could be revealed only by light. For the first time since his fall from the broken tower, Bran understood that he possessed something his enemies did not know existed. Outside, the wind sighed through the branches of the heart tree, and somewhere beneath Winterfell's ancient stones, hidden doors waited for someone who finally knew where to begin looking. Bran waited until the castle had settled into the quiet rhythm of evening before showing the hidden map to anyone. The servants drifted toward the kitchens. The guards changed watch upon the walls, and the sounds of hammering from the smithy faded into silence. Candlelight trembled across his chamber while Summer lay beneath the window, alert despite his stillness. Bran studied the parchment once more, tracing the faint lines with a careful finger. The passages beneath Winterfell resembled the roots of the great weirwood itself, spreading in every direction, yet one path had been marked more boldly than the others, as though someone had wished future readers to follow it without hesitation. When Robb arrived, accompanied only by Maester Luwin, Bran held the parchment before the fire until the hidden markings slowly emerged. Neither man spoke for several moments. Robb leaned closer, his shadow falling across the table while Luwin adjusted the crystal lens hanging from his chain. The old maester's calm expression gave way to genuine astonishment. "Remarkable," he whispered. "The ink is nearly invisible until warmed. I have read of such methods at the Citadel, though I have never seen one executed so skillfully." Robb followed the branching tunnels with one finger until he reached the carved dire wolf symbol beneath the godswood. "Can we reach this place?" he asked. Bran shook his head slowly. "Not from the passage beneath the crypts. That tunnel was sealed from the other side." Luwin examined the map again before pointing toward another narrow line that curved beneath the outer wall. "There appears to be another entrance," he observed. "If this drawing is accurate, it begins somewhere near the old Hunter's Well, beyond the glass gardens." The Hunter's Well had not supplied water in generations. It stood half swallowed by weeds beyond Winterfell's cultivated paths, ignored by everyone except children chasing one another through the overgrown fields. Bran remembered playing there years ago with Rickon, dropping pebbles into the darkness and waiting for the faint splash that never came. The memory settled strangely within him. Had the adults always known the place mattered, or had knowledge faded so completely that the forgotten well had become nothing more than another piece of the castle's ancient landscape? Robb folded the map with deliberate care. "We go tonight," he said quietly. Sir Roderick would normally have insisted upon bringing 20 armed men, but Robb chose secrecy instead. Too many eyes had already watched Winterfell from beyond its walls, and too many ears might be listening within them. Only Robb, Sir Roderick, Bran, Hodor, Summer, and Maester Luwin would make the journey. If enemies truly hid among the castle's own people, fewer companions meant fewer opportunities for betrayal. The moon remained hidden behind thick clouds as they crossed the darkened grounds. Hodor carried Bran across uneven earth while Summer ranged silently ahead, disappearing and reappearing like a gray spirit between patches of shadow. The old well stood exactly where Bran remembered, its circular stones cracked by frost and wrapped in climbing ivy. Rainwater glistened along the worn rim, reflecting the faint glow of Robb's hooded lantern. At first glance, the place appeared abandoned for decades. Sir Roderick tested the old stones with the butt of his sword until one shifted beneath the pressure. He frowned, crouched lower, and pushed again. A section of the well's inner wall swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow stair descending into darkness. Cold air drifted upward, carrying the smell of damp earth, stale water, and ancient stone. Rob exchanged a silent glance with Bran before drawing his sword. No one spoke as they entered one by one, allowing the hidden door to settle quietly back into place behind them. The stair wound downward, far deeper than Bran expected. Moisture trickled constantly along the walls, and the lantern's light caught veins of pale mineral running through the rock like frozen streams. After what felt like many minutes, the passage widened into another corridor, supported by thick stone pillars blackened with age. Here the map proved true. Bran recognized the branching tunnels from the hidden markings upon the parchment, each passage disappearing into darkness beneath different parts of Winterfell. Summer stopped so suddenly that Rob nearly walked into him. The direwolf stood absolutely motionless, his nose lifted toward the air. A low growl rumbled deep within his chest, quiet enough to escape anyone except those standing nearby. Bran felt the warning before hearing the sound himself. Somewhere ahead, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of footsteps. More than one pair. They moved slowly, carrying no lantern, as though their owners knew these tunnels by memory alone. Rob extinguished the lantern immediately. Darkness wrapped around them with startling completeness. Bran could hear only breathing, the slow drip of unseen water, and the approaching footsteps. They drew nearer before stopping, somewhere beyond the nearest bend. Voices followed, too quiet to distinguish clearly. One belonged to a man Bran had never heard before. The other froze him where he sat. It was Gage. "I searched the chamber myself," the former cook whispered. "The remaining records were gone." "Then the boy found them?" answered the unfamiliar voice. Silence followed. Bran felt every heartbeat echo through his chest. They knew. Not everything, perhaps not even the map itself, but they knew someone had entered the hidden chamber before Gage returned. The unknown man spoke again, his tone calm despite the failure. "If the Stark child understands what he carries, our work becomes difficult. If he does not..." He allowed the sentence to trail away before adding quietly, "Then Winterfell still sleeps." The footsteps resumed. Rob gripped his sword more tightly while Sir Roderick shifted beside the tunnel wall, prepared to strike if the strangers rounded the corner. Bran held his breath, certain that the next few heartbeats would decide everything. Yet, instead of approaching, the footsteps slowly faded into another passage, leading deeper beneath the castle. Gage and his companion had chosen another route entirely, disappearing into darkness without ever realizing their enemy stood only a few yards away. Only when complete silence returned did Rob relight the lantern. He looked first at Bran, then toward the passage where the voices had vanished. "They fear what you found," he said in a low voice. Bran nodded, though his thoughts remained fixed upon a single phrase. "Winterfell still sleeps." He did not know precisely what those words meant, but he felt their weight all the same. Somewhere beneath the ancient castle lay something more important than forgotten records or hidden tunnels. The people hunting through the darkness were not searching for treasure. They were searching for whatever the old keepers had sworn to protect, and now Bran knew exactly which passage they had taken. No one spoke for several moments after the voices faded into the depths below Winterfell. The silence seemed heavier than stone, broken only by the distant dripping of water somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern. Rob kept his sword drawn, though the blade now pointed toward the floor, rather than the darkness ahead. Sir Roderick listened with the patience of an old soldier who had survived by trusting his ears as much as his steel. Bran looked down at the map spread across his lap and slowly traced the passage gauge, and the unknown man had followed. It curved beneath the godswood before ending at the same carved direwolf symbol that had first caught Bran's attention. "They're going to the same place we seek," Bran whispered. Rob nodded once, his face hardening with resolve. "Then we follow, but carefully." The young lord extinguished every unnecessary light, leaving only the hooded lantern in Sir Roderick's hand to cast a narrow beam along the tunnel floor. The air grew steadily colder as they advanced, and the walls changed with them. The carefully cut stone gave way to rougher rock, interrupted by thick roots that had forced their way through cracks over countless centuries. Some roots were no thicker than a man's thumb, while others twisted across the ceiling like the limbs of ancient giants sleeping beneath the earth. Summer moved ahead with remarkable caution, placing each paw silently upon the damp stone. Every few steps the dire wolf paused to test the air before continuing. Bran had come to trust those pauses. The wolf sensed things that no human could, and more than once Summer altered their path slightly to avoid loose rocks or hidden puddles that might betray their presence. Watching him, Bran felt the strange bond between them strengthen again. It was no longer merely affection between boy and beast. Their thoughts brushed against one another in fleeting moments, clear enough to guide but too brief to explain. The tunnel widened unexpectedly into a circular chamber supported by 4 immense stone pillars. Their surfaces had been carved long ago with faded images of wolves, trees, rivers, and stars, though time had worn many details smooth. Between the pillars stood broken stands where torches must once have burned, and beneath a thick layer of dust lay fragments of shattered pottery and rusted tools. Maester Luwin knelt beside one of the carvings, brushing away centuries of grime with careful fingers. "These marks predate the Andals," he murmured. "Perhaps by hundreds of years. No record at the Citadel speaks of a chamber like this." Bran wheeled closer as Hodor lowered him beside the nearest pillar. There, almost hidden beneath moss that somehow survived in the underground damp, he recognized the same symbol carved upon the stone tablet. The dire wolf stood facing a weirwood, but now another figure appeared behind the tree. It was a man wearing neither crown nor armor, his empty hands raised toward the branches. Beneath the carving ran a line of ancient runes, too weathered for Bran to read. Yet as his fingers rested upon the cold stone, another vision seized him without warning. Torchlight flickered across the chamber as living men filled the space, where only silence now remained. Warriors bearing bronze axes stood in solemn ranks, while women in gray cloaks carried bowls of clear water to the foot of the carved pillars. At the center knelt an elderly Stark lord, whose long beard had turned white with age. Before him rested a heavy wooden chest, and beside it stood 3 children of the forest, their golden eyes reflecting the firelight without blinking. One of them placed a hand upon the chest and spoke words Bran could not understand, yet somehow he grasped their meaning all the same. The promise must remain hidden until the long winter returns. The vision dissolved as quickly as it had come, leaving Bran breathing hard. Robb caught him before he could slump sideways from Hodor's arms. "What did you see?" his brother asked. Bran described the gathering as best he could, careful not to exaggerate what he had witnessed. Luwin listened with thoughtful silence rather than disbelief, while Ser Rodrik glanced uneasily toward the dark tunnels leading away from the chamber. "Old magic," the knight muttered. "The North was built upon more of it than Southern men care to admit." Before anyone could speak again, Summer stiffened. The wolf's ears rose sharply, and his gaze fixed upon a narrow passage opposite the one they had entered. A faint orange glow shimmered there, barely visible against the darkness. Someone carried a lantern deeper within the tunnels. Robb immediately lowered his own light until only a narrow slit remained uncovered. The distant glow moved slowly across the far wall, then stopped altogether. Voices followed, clearer now than before. "They cannot have come this far," Gage said. "They have already come farther than expected," replied the unknown man. His voice remained calm, but Bran heard the edge beneath it. "The boy dreams. That was never part of our reckoning." A long silence settled before Gage spoke again. "Then perhaps he should die, as the first plan intended." Bran felt Robb tense beside him. "No," the stranger answered firmly. "Not here. A dead Stark within Winterfell would awaken every sword in the North. We need confusion, not war. Retrieve the ledger, destroy what remains, and leave before dawn." The lantern glow began moving again. Robb looked toward Ser Rodrik, and no words were needed between them. They could allow the two men to disappear once more into the endless tunnels, or they could follow and finally discover what lay at the heart of this hidden network. Ser Rodrik gave the slightest nod. The decision had already been made. They advanced only after the voices had faded into the distance. The passage narrowed steadily until the ceiling forced even Robb to bow his head. Cold moisture dripped from tangled roots overhead, and the smell of earth became stronger with every step. Bran studied the map again by the lantern's faint glow. According to the hidden markings, they were nearing the place marked by the dire wolf symbol. Beyond it, the parchment showed nothing at all. Either the map ended there, or whoever had created it had deliberately concealed what lay farther ahead. At last the corridor opened into another chamber, unlike any Bran had yet seen. It was long and oval, its walls formed not by cut stone, but by the living roots of the great weirwood above. Thick, pale roots arched overhead, weaving together into a natural ceiling that glimmered faintly in the lantern light. At the center stood a broad stone table upon which rested dozens of small clay tablets, cracked by age but carefully arranged in neat rows. Most astonishing of all, fresh footprints covered the dusty floor around the table. "They were here only moments ago," Robb whispered. Bran's eyes traveled beyond the table and settled upon a massive wooden door set into the roots at the far end of the chamber. Iron bands crossed its weathered surface, though rust had long ago consumed their edges. In its center had been carved the same direwolf and weirwood that appeared on the tablet and the hidden map. One of the doors stood slightly open. From the darkness beyond came the unmistakable sound of pages being turned. No one moved at first. The faint rustle of pages turning drifted through the narrow opening in the ancient door, steady and unhurried, as though whoever stood beyond believed himself entirely alone. Rob raised one hand, silently ordering patience, while Sir Roderick shifted his grip upon the hilt of his sword. The lantern's hood remained nearly closed, allowing only a thin ribbon of light to spill across the floor. Bran listened with every ounce of concentration he possessed. Beneath the turning of parchment, he caught another sound, softer still, the scrape of a boot against stone, followed by the muted clink of metal. Summer slipped forward without a whisper. The dire wolf lowered his body until his belly nearly brushed the ground, every movement deliberate and controlled. Bran felt the wolf's awareness brush against his own again, clearer than ever before. He sensed the shape of the room beyond through Summer's instincts alone. 2 men stood inside. One remained near a table. The other searched shelves carved into the living roots themselves. Neither expected company. Rob leaned close enough that only Bran could hear him. If we take them now, we may finally learn who commands this. Bran considered the words, but the familiar certainty settled over him with quiet insistence. It came not as a vision, nor as a voice, but as an understanding impossible to ignore. No, Bran whispered, someone else is here. Rob searched his brother's face for a moment before slowly lowering the sword. He had begun trusting Bran's strange instincts even when they defied reason. The answer came only heartbeats later. A harsh cry echoed from deeper within the chamber, followed instantly by the clash of steel. The peaceful rhythm of turning pages vanished beneath shouts of alarm. Gage cursed loudly while another voice barked orders. Neither Bran nor Rob could fully distinguish. Then came the unmistakable sound of arrows striking wood. Whatever had happened beyond the door, the hidden searchers had not been alone after all. Someone else had entered the chamber before the Starks arrived. Rob wasted no more time. He threw the door wide and rushed inside with Sir Roderick at his side. Hodor carried Bran after them, while Summer bounded ahead in a gray blur. The chamber beyond dwarfed every hidden room they had yet discovered. Shelves carved directly into the pale roots stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with weathered ledgers, wooden tablets, sealed clay jars, and bundles of ancient scrolls wrapped carefully in faded leather. Long tables occupied the center of the room where open books lay scattered beside overturned lanterns. At the far end, 3 cloaked men battled one another in frantic silence. For a heartbeat, Bran struggled to understand what he was seeing. Gage had drawn a short sword and fought desperately beside the broad-shouldered spearman Bran had glimpsed in Summer's dream. Facing them stood 2 strangers dressed in dark wool cloaks stained by rain and mud from long travel. Neither bore any sigil. One had already fallen with an arrow through his chest, while the other fought fiercely with a curved blade despite blood running freely down one arm. None of them expected Robb Stark to burst into the chamber, and surprise broke the deadlock at once. Sir Roderick met the spearman with a ringing crash of steel that echoed beneath the tangled roots overhead. Robb drove toward Gage, forcing the former cook backward across the scattered books. Summer sprang past them both, his jaws closing around the wounded stranger's sword arm before the man could strike again. Bran watched from Hodor's shoulders as confusion swept the chamber. It became painfully clear that there were not one, but at least 2 secret factions hunting the same hidden knowledge beneath Winterfell. The unknown leader appeared only then, A narrow passage concealed behind the shelves opened without warning, and an elderly man stepped calmly into the chamber. He wore plain traveling clothes beneath a dark cloak, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his expression composed despite the violence unfolding before him. He carried no sword. Instead, he held a thick leather ledger clasped beneath one arm. The moment Bran saw his face, certainty struck with such force that it stole his breath. This man had commanded Gage from the beginning. The old man did not flee. He studied Robb, Bran, and the fighting men with eyes that missed nothing before speaking in a voice that carried effortlessly through the chamber. "Enough," he said. The word itself seemed absurd amid clashing steel, yet everyone hesitated. Even Gage glanced toward him instinctively. The old man took another measured step forward. "You waste blood protecting records you do not understand," he said, looking directly at Robb. "Your house has forgotten its own charge, yet still you stumble across its remnants." His gaze shifted at last to Bran. "The boy remembers more quickly than I feared." Robb raised his sword. "Who are you?" The old man regarded him almost sadly. "My name no longer matters. My family surrendered it generations ago." His fingers rested lightly upon the worn ledger. "We served the watch beneath the roots long before the Andals crossed the narrow sea. When the order broke apart, some believed these records should remain hidden. Others believed kings had no right to bury truths that belonged to all the North. We have struggled over that question ever since." One of the wounded strangers suddenly lunged toward the ledger. The movement shattered the brief stillness. Summer released his own captive and sprang across the chamber, but the stranger reached the old man first. Steel flashed. The ledger slipped from aged hands and struck the stone floor. Gage shouted in alarm while Ser Roderick drove the spearman backward with a powerful stroke. In the chaos, an overturned lantern rolled beneath the nearest shelf. Oil spread across the ancient roots. A single flame caught. Fire raced upward with terrifying speed. The dry leather bindings and brittle scrolls ignited almost instantly, sending thick smoke boiling toward the ceiling. The chamber filled with the sharp smell of burning parchment and old wood that had slept undisturbed for centuries. Men forgot one another as they turned instead toward the growing blaze. The old leader stared at the flames with an expression Bran could not read. It was not fear, it was grief. Bran's eyes fell upon the ledger lying abandoned between the spreading fire and the struggling men. Every instinct told him the same thing. If those pages burned, the secret guarded beneath Winterfell for thousands of years would vanish forever. Bran did not hesitate. "Hodor!" he shouted, louder than anyone had ever heard him call. The great stable boy reacted before thought could slow him, charging through the smoke while burning scraps of parchment drifted around him like black snow. Summer raced beside him, snapping at tongues of flame that leaped across the floor as though the fire itself were an enemy. Robb turned instinctively to cover them, his sword intercepting a wild stroke from the wounded stranger, while Ser Roderick forced the spearman back toward the chamber wall. For one brief moment, every man in the room fought for a different purpose. The fire spread with frightening speed through the dry records stacked upon the carved shelves. Clay jars burst in the growing heat, scattering ash and fragments across the stone floor. Smoke rolled beneath the ceiling of pale roots, hiding the upper reaches of the chamber until they seemed swallowed by a dark storm cloud. Bran coughed as Hodor lowered him beside the fallen ledger, but even through watering eyes he could see that the heavy book remained untouched by flame. Its thick leather cover had protected it longer than the loose scrolls scattered nearby. "Take only the ledger," Bran said, struggling to draw a full breath. Hodor reached toward the book, yet the old silver-bearded man suddenly stepped between them. His lined face glowed orange in the firelight, and sorrow weighed upon his features, more heavily than fear. He did not raise a weapon. Instead, he placed one weathered hand upon the leather cover and looked directly at Bran. "Do you know what you are asking to preserve?" he said quietly. "Knowledge has destroyed more kingdoms than swords ever have." Bran met the old man's gaze without looking away. The strange certainty rose within him again, steady and clear, despite the chaos surrounding them. This man believed every word he spoke. He had sacrificed years, perhaps generations of his family's life to guard these records. Yet another truth stood behind the first. He had also hidden them from the very people they had been meant to protect. "If they burn," Bran answered, "no one will ever choose again." The old man's expression changed almost imperceptibly. It was not surrender nor agreement, but recognition. Slowly, he removed his hand from the ledger. "Then choose better than we did," he murmured. Before Bran could answer, the chamber shook beneath a deep rumble. One of the great root-covered shelves collapsed into the flames, sending a wave of sparks across the room. The old man turned at once, disappearing into the smoke with surprising speed. Bran caught only a final glimpse of his dark cloak before he vanished into one of the hidden passages beyond the burning shelves. Robb fought his way toward Bran through the confusion. Gage, seeing the ledger lifted into Hodor's powerful arms, abandoned all thought of escape and lunged forward with desperate determination. His short blade flashed toward Bran, but Summer met him halfway. The dire wolf struck with such force that both man and wolf crashed into a burning table. Gage cried out as flames caught his sleeve, and terror replaced the cold confidence Bran had seen in him beneath the crypts. He clawed frantically at the fire while Summer sprang clear, his gray coat singed but otherwise unharmed. Sir Roderick reached Gage before he could regain his feet. One sharp blow knocked the sword from the former cook's hand, and another sent him sprawling across the stone. "Enough," the old knight growled, placing his blade against Gage's throat. The broad-shouldered spearmen, seeing the chamber collapsing around them, fled into the smoke without another attack. Robb started after him, but Bran called his name. "Leave him. The fire will close every tunnel." Robb looked once toward the escaping man, then back at the spreading blaze, and reluctantly nodded. The remaining stranger, who had fought against Gage's group, lay mortally wounded beside the shattered shelves. Blood darkened the stone beneath him while smoke drifted slowly around his failing breaths. Robb knelt beside him long enough to ask a single question. "Who sent you?" The man managed a faint smile despite the pain. "No king," he whispered. "Only those who believed the North deserved the truth." His eyes drifted toward the burning records before closing forever. Whatever cause had brought him beneath Winterfell ended there among the ashes. "Hodor," Bran urged. The great stable boy gathered Bran in one arm and the heavy ledger beneath the other. then hurried toward the chamber entrance with surprising speed. Robb and Sir Roderick followed close behind, dragging the bound Gage between them while Maester Lewin carried the carved stone tablet rescued from the earlier chamber. Behind them, the fire roared louder than any forge Bran had ever heard. Thick roots cracked beneath the heat, shedding showers of glowing embers that filled the tunnels with blinding sparks. They had nearly reached the circular chamber when the ground trembled again. This time the shaking came not from burning shelves, but from deep within the earth itself. Dust poured from the ceiling. Stones shifted beneath their feet. A thunderous crash echoed through the passages as one of the tunnels behind them collapsed completely. The blast of air nearly extinguished the lantern and threw everyone against the walls. Hodor shielded Bran with his own body while Summer crouched low, growling at the trembling darkness as though challenging the mountain itself. When the rumbling finally ceased, silence returned with startling suddenness. The passage leading back toward the burning archive no longer existed. A wall of shattered stone blocked it from floor to ceiling, sealing the hidden chamber forever beneath tons of fallen rock. Robb stared at the collapse for several long moments before lowering his sword. "Whatever remained behind us," he said quietly, "is gone." Bran looked at the ledger resting safely across Hodor's broad shoulder. It had become the last surviving record from the hidden archive, the only piece of a history that had nearly vanished beneath fire and stone. Yet his thoughts lingered not upon the book, but upon the old silver-bearded keeper. The man had escaped before the collapse. Bran felt certain of it. Their paths would cross again someday. Men who carried burdens across generations did not disappear so easily. The climb back toward the hidden well seemed far longer than the descent had been. Every breath tasted of smoke, and every distant creak of shifting stone reminded them how fragile the ancient tunnels had become. When at last the hidden door opened beneath the night sky, cool air swept across their faces with almost painful freshness. Above them, the stars shone between broken clouds, indifferent to the struggle that had unfolded beneath Winterfell. Bran drew a deep breath and looked back only once before Hodor carried him toward the sleeping castle. Somewhere below those ancient foundations, the fire still burned, consuming secrets that had survived since the Age of Heroes. Yet one secret had escaped the flames, and Bran could already feel its weight settling upon his shoulders. Winterfell woke the next morning to the smell of wet earth and wood smoke, unaware that a hidden fire had consumed a forgotten chamber beneath its foundations. Men resumed their duties upon the walls. Servants carried baskets between the kitchens and the great hall, and horses stamped impatiently in the stables, as though the castle itself had decided that ordinary life must continue. Only a handful of people knew what had truly happened beneath the ancient stones. They spoke little, each carrying the weight of the night's discoveries in silence. Bran watched them from his chamber window and understood that some victories left no songs behind them. Gage was locked beneath heavy guard in one of the old tower cells. His burned arm had been dressed by Maester Lewin, though no comfort had been offered beyond what duty required. Robb questioned him before noon, with Ser Roderick standing nearby and Bran listening from a carved chair beside the hearth. The former cook bore little resemblance to the cheerful man who had once shouted at kitchen boys for overcooking venison. His hair had been singed away on one side, soot still darkened his face, and exhaustion hollowed his eyes. Yet beneath all of it remained the same stubborn resolve that had carried him through years of deception. "You served my father for nearly 12 years, Robb said quietly. "Why?" Gage met the young lord's gaze without lowering his own. "Because your father was an honorable man," he answered. "Honorable men are often easier to deceive than cruel ones. They trust loyalty because they would never betray it themselves." The words angered Sir Roderick, whose hand tightened around his sword hilt, but Robb lifted one hand to keep the old knight still. Bran listened carefully. Gage was no longer trying to escape punishment. He wanted them to understand. Robb asked who had recruited him, but Gage only smiled faintly. "I was born into it," he said. "My father served before me and his father before him. We were taught that the records beneath Winterfell were too dangerous for any lord to possess. Kings keep power by deciding what the realm remembers and what it forgets. We believed no family, not even House Stark, should hold such knowledge alone." Bran watched the man's face while he spoke and felt no deception. Gage believed he had acted with honor, even after years spent living beneath another man's name. "The old man in the archive?" Bran asked quietly. "Who is he?" Gage's expression changed for the first time. Respect softened the bitterness in his eyes. "The last keeper," he replied. "Or so he calls himself. He has worn many names. None of them matter now." Bran sensed another answer, hidden behind the first. Not a lie, but a silence chosen deliberately. Gage would die before revealing where the keeper had gone, and everyone in the room understood it. When the questioning ended, Maester Luwin carried the rescued ledger into the solar above the great hall. The heavy book rested upon the table between them, like a relic rescued from another age. Its leather binding had blackened from smoke, yet the pages within remained astonishingly well preserved. Bran turned the first leaf with great care. Every page had been filled in several different hands across countless generations. Dates stretched back farther than the conquest, farther even than the oldest chronicles in Winterfell's library. It was less a history than a record of duties faithfully passed from one generation to the next. Many entries described repairs to tunnels, hidden chambers, and ancient stonework beneath the castle. Others listed names of those who had served as watchers beneath the roots, each succeeding the last in careful order. Yet scattered among those practical records appeared stranger passages. They spoke of winters unlike any remembered by living men, of ravens that refused to fly, of weirwoods bleeding sap even beneath frozen skies, and of dark figures glimpsed moving beyond the wall before vanishing with the dawn. None of the entries drifted into wild tales or impossible boasts. They were written with the plain certainty of men recording weather, harvests, or the deaths of old friends. Near the middle of the ledger, Bran found a page marked by a narrow strip of faded leather. The handwriting differed from every other entry, stronger and more deliberate, as though the writer had known these words would one day matter more than the rest. Maester Luwin read them aloud while the others listened in complete silence. When memory weakens, stone must remember. When stone breaks, blood must remember. The charge belongs not to keepers nor to kings, but to Winterfell itself. If the others ride again the hidden roads, shall open only to the wolves. The room remained silent long after Lewin finished reading. Rob slowly rested both hands upon the table. "There is no mention of treasure," he observed. "No secret weapon, no forgotten crown." Lewin nodded thoughtfully. "No, only responsibility." Bran looked down at the worn pages and felt the truth settling into place. The factions beneath Winterfell had fought for centuries over records whose greatest purpose had never been wealth or power. They preserved memory. They ensured that each generation knew enough to prepare for the winter that would someday return. By evening, the decision had been made. Robb ordered every known entrance to the surviving tunnels sealed with fresh stone under the supervision of trusted masons. Only the hidden passage beneath the crypts would remain untouched, though its mechanism would be concealed once more behind solid masonry. The ledger itself would not be displayed in Winterfell's library or locked inside the Lord's chambers. Instead, Maester Lewin proposed another resting place, one known only to the Starks and those they trusted completely. Robb accepted without hesitation. As twilight settled over the castle, Bran asked Hodor to carry him alone to the Godswood. Summer walked beside them through the quiet paths, while the leaves of the great weirwood stirred gently in the evening breeze. The pools around the heart tree reflected the fading sky like polished glass. Hodor placed Bran beneath the pale branches before withdrawing a respectful distance. For a long while, Bran simply listened to the soft murmur of water flowing through hidden channels beneath the earth. He rested one hand against the smooth white bark. No vision came this time. Instead, there was only stillness deep and enduring, as old as the castle itself. Bran realized he no longer needed dreams to understand what the ancient tree had guarded for so many centuries. Winterfell had never been merely a fortress raised against armies. It had been built to preserve remembrance when memory itself failed. Men had forgotten the reason. They had argued over the records, stolen them, hidden them, and killed to possess them. Yet the heart of the charge had survived, because it belonged not to parchment or stone, but to those willing to carry it forward. As darkness gathered beneath the branches, Summer lay beside Bran with his great head resting across the boy's feet that could no longer feel warmth or cold. Bran looked toward the castle rising beyond the Godswood, its towers glowing softly in the last light of day. He understood now why the Keeper had looked at him with sorrow instead of hatred. The burden had never truly belonged to secret orders hidden beneath the earth. It had always been waiting for a Stark who could see beyond pride, beyond fear, and beyond the lies men told themselves. Whether he had sought it or not, that burden had found him at last. The days that followed passed with deceptive calm. Rain washed soot from Winterfell's walls. The training yard rang once more with the sound of wooden swords, and servants returned to their ordinary routines, as though nothing unusual had disturbed the ancient castle. Yet beneath that familiar order, quiet changes had begun. Trusted masons worked under Sir Roderick's watch, sealing forgotten corridors with fresh-cut stone while claiming they repaired old foundations weakened by age. No one outside a handful of loyal souls questioned the work. Winterfell had stood for thousands of years, and no one found it strange that old walls should occasionally require mending. Gage remained imprisoned until riders could safely escort him south for judgment, though Bran doubted he would ever reveal more than he already had. The former cook spent long hours staring through the narrow window of his cell toward the godswood, speaking to no one unless questioned directly. Bran visited him only once more. There was no anger between them now, only the quiet understanding that they had stood on opposite sides of the same duty. "You believe you have won," Gage said softly as Bran prepared to leave. Bran shook his head. "No, I believe the fighting was never about winning." For the first time since his capture, Gage smiled with something resembling respect. Maester Luwin and Robb spent several evenings studying the rescued ledger together. They copied only those passages concerning the maintenance of Winterfell itself, locking the originals away before dawn each morning. The rest remained unread for the time being. Robb feared that too many revelations at once might cloud judgment rather than sharpen it, and Luwin agreed. Ancient records deserved patience. Bran admired that decision. Knowledge gathered in haste could become as dangerous as ignorance. One afternoon, while the autumn wind carried yellow leaves across the yard, a raven arrived from the south. Its message bore grave news from King's Landing. Lord Eddard Stark had been named Hand of the King in truth, but the royal court had become a nest of suspicion, accusations, and hidden enemies. Robb folded the letter slowly after reading it aloud to those gathered in the solar. The burdens upon House Stark had grown heavier still, though no one within the room spoke of despair. They simply understood that the world beyond Winterfell was beginning to change as surely as the world beneath it already had. That evening, Bran asked to see the ledger one final time before it disappeared into its new hiding place. Hodor carried him into a small chamber concealed behind the oldest section of the library, where only Robb, Maester Luwin, and Ser Rodrik accompanied him. The room contained no treasure, no jeweled crowns, nor ancient weapons. Its shelves held only plain wooden boxes filled with family records, maps, and letters preserved across generations. The rescued ledger rested among them naturally, as though it had always belonged there. Robb placed a heavy iron key into the lock and turned it until the mechanism settled with a deep, satisfying click. "You should know where it is kept," Robb said. Bran looked at his brother and smiled faintly. "I already do." Robb laughed quietly, the first genuine laugh Bran had heard from him since their father had ridden south. It echoed warmly through the little chamber before fading into silence. The moment reminded Bran that wisdom did not always reveal itself through visions or forgotten secrets. Sometimes it lived within simple trust, shared between brothers. That trust had become more precious than any hidden archive beneath the earth. Several days later, Bran returned to the crypts alone with Hodor and Summer. The broken mechanism behind the old king's statue had already been sealed beneath fresh stone, leaving no visible trace that a passage had ever existed there. The ancient kings remained seated upon their stone thrones with iron swords across their laps, their weathered faces as solemn as ever. Bran looked from one statue to the next, wondering how many of them had known the true purpose of Winterfell, and how many had inherited only fragments of the old charge. Perhaps even Lord Eddard had never learned the whole truth. Not every secret survived unchanged from father to son. As Hodor turned to leave, Bran paused before the oldest statue in the crypt, where time had nearly erased the king's name. He he rested one hand upon the cold stone knee and closed his eyes. No vision came, no whisper drifted through the darkness, and no hidden door opened beneath the earth. Instead, he felt only the quiet certainty that had guided him since his fall. It no longer arrived like an unexpected visitor. It had become part of him, calm and steady, helping him separate truth from deception without drowning either in mystery. The strange gift had not made him greater than other men. It had simply taught him to look more carefully at the world before judging it. Winter deepened its hold upon the north as the first true snows finally reached Winterfell. White gathered along the battlements, softened the roofs of the towers, and settled upon the bare branches of the godswood until the heart tree stood alone in crimson and white. Bran watched the snowfall from his window, with summer lying peacefully beside him. Somewhere beyond those distant forests, the wall still stood against the endless cold, and farther north than that, ancient powers waited with patient silence. The ledger had confirmed what old tales only hinted at. The long night belonged to history, but history had a way of returning when forgotten. Bran understood that he would one day leave Winterfell. The dreams that still came on certain nights, the three-eyed crow waiting beyond sleep, and the road leading north had not released him. Those journeys still lay ahead, just as they had in the tales yet to unfold. But he would not leave as the carefree boy who once climbed towers without fear. He would carry with him the memory of hidden chambers, burned records, divided keepers, and the lesson that the greatest offenses were often those no enemy believed still existed. Many years later, men would remember Bran Stark by many names. Some would call him a green seer. Others would speak of him as a king, or as the last student of forgotten powers. Yet among the few who knew what had truly happened beneath Winterfell before war swept across the realm, another name endured in quiet conversation. They called him the Enlightened One, not because he possessed all knowledge, nor because he claimed perfect wisdom, but because he had chosen to preserve the truth instead of owning it. In an age when kingdoms bled over crowns, ambitions, and lies, that single choice proved stronger than hidden swords, older than secret orders, and worthy of the ancient castle that had entrusted its memory to the son of House Stark. If you remain with Bran until the last page, you begin to understand that the greatest battles in the world of Westeros are rarely won upon open fields. Men remember the thunder of cavalry and the clash of banners because those moments are easy to see. Yet the fate of kingdoms often turns in quiet places where only a handful of witnesses ever stand. A forgotten passage beneath an ancient castle may shape history as surely as a victorious army. A single choice to preserve truth instead of destroying it may echo longer than any king's decree. That is the strange justice of George R.R. Martin's world, where glory often fades, while unseen acts of duty continue working through generations. You also discover that honor is neither simple nor pure. Gage believed he served the North even while betraying the family that sheltered him. The keeper surrendered his own name so that memory might survive, yet in guarding knowledge too fiercely, he became part of the very forgetting he feared. Robb learned that leadership demands trust, but also the painful wisdom to question those closest to him. Bran himself gained no miraculous answer that solved every mystery. Instead, he learned that truth carries weight, and whoever holds it must accept responsibility for consequences that cannot always be foreseen. Power in the end proves less dangerous than memory. Thrones rise and fall, castles burn, noble houses vanish, but forgotten promises return with the changing of the seasons. The North survives not because its walls are higher than those of southern castles, nor because its swords are sharper, but because somewhere beneath pride and ambition there remains a stubborn refusal to abandon old duties completely. Even when those duties are misunderstood, divided, or buried beneath centuries of silence, they endure. In that quiet endurance lies the true strength of Winterfell, stronger than stone because it lives within people willing to remember. Perhaps that is why Bran deserves the name the story gives him. He is not enlightened because he sees more visions than other men or touches older magic than anyone before him. He earns the name because he refuses to let knowledge become another weapon. In a land where secrets are bought with blood and power is measured by what others are denied, he chooses to preserve rather than possess. That choice does not make the world gentler, nor does it spare him from the roads still waiting beyond the wall, but it allows him to remain worthy of the house into which he was born. And when you leave Winterfell at last, it is worth remembering where everything truly began, not with hidden ledgers or ancient tunnels, nor with whispered conspiracies beneath the earth, but with a boy climbing higher than he should have beneath a pale northern sky. His fall broke his body, yet it also stripped away every comforting illusion about the world around him. From that moment forward, he learned to see what others overlooked: the quiet loyalties, the hidden betrayals, the promises buried beneath old stone. Somewhere above those ancient crypts, the wind still circles the towers of Winterfell, carrying the scent of smoke, cold granite, and distant snow, while another young climber might look upward without knowing how much history sleeps beneath his feet.